afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about parcel shipping, which is a lot of it relates to last mile. All those packages you guys get at your houses, how's it happen, and what the current state of the industry is. So we have LJM partners with us today. We've got Thomas Anderson and Kenneth Moyer, and both of them are partners with the LJM, and we'll be able to explain the industry to us. Maybe you guys want to start off by just sharing a little bit of a quick thought on what LJM does more specifically than I just mentioned. But
Sure. We're the kind of the leading parcel consultancy in the U.S. So we help shippers reduce their costs through contract negotiations with carriers, network optimization, parcel analytics and intelligence, and really help them streamline their costs, reduce costs, and figure out the best way to get their products to market.
Thanks. So now, Kenneth, tell us about what's going on in the industry right now, and sort of just to help frame things, for us. How are you seeing the industry right now in terms of UPS, FedEx, and the other parcel shippers?
Yeah, I'll take the first part, and I'll let Thomas answer some of that too. But it's very dynamic compared to what we've seen in the last few years. Since the onset of the pandemic, things have changed at a very rapid pace, right? So the acceleration of the evolution of the market has been pretty dramatic, both in terms of pricing, in terms of asset utilization from the carriers, in terms of their strategy, capacity additions, and now capacity subtractions. So I'll let Thomas answer.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I would say, UPS and FedEx have largely stabilized, sort of flattened out. And we've seen, obviously, the post office take on a lot more there. The traditional volume that was handled through ground saver or SurePost at UPS, for example, they let some of those agreements expire. So USPS will remain relatively flat this year, perhaps down a little bit, but the revenue will be up slightly. So a little bit more revenue per shipment. Probably anticipates some sort of relationship being worked out between UPS and the post office at some point in the future, but that's certainly hard to predict. Amazon taking on a greater component altogether, becoming really the one that's gaining the mass amount of volume. And then you have a lot of these smaller regional or more local, even sort of gig solutions that they're growing at the fastest rate. But I think when you really look at from a volume perspective and revenue, it's a very small portion. I think maybe 3% of the market altogether in terms of parcels. So it's still a very small amount, but growing at the fastest rate.
Can you talk more, maybe, Kenneth, about the pricing situation we're in? It always seems to be very volatile, and I know we've talked for years, and it's like every year there's another surcharge, and maybe you can share some thoughts on that.
Sure. No, that's top of mind for everybody these days. So a lot of you may remember that the typical cadence of carrier rate increases were basically once a year. So once you got the general rate increase announcement, you can set your budget for the year. That's completely out the window now. In fact, Thomas and I just gave a presentation a few weeks ago, and we counted up the UPS and FedEx have had 38 rate increases so far in 2025. So the pace, the cadence of increases has dramatically changed. And it really creates a difficult environment when you're trying to keep up with these things. Not only are these increases built to drive revenue, of course, but they're also designed to mold shipper behavior. So we see certain increases trying to encourage some behavior and discourage others. For example, what size boxes the carriers want to move, when they want to move those boxes. So there's this dual purpose of revenue generation and changing shipper behavior. And we just see that moving more and more and increasing and becoming a deeper and deeper entrenched strategy for both carriers.
Yeah, that makes it quite difficult, I guess. How do you advise on how to handle that? I mean, how do the carriers justify these surcharges? Like, what is it? Just, they can't say tariffs or something, right? Is that what it is? Or?
No, we call it because they can surcharge. So there isn't necessarily a justification for each one. And to be honest with you, a lot of shippers are just simply unaware of them, right? And that's one of the things we spend a lot of time on is education. So anytime there's an increase or a change, we quantify that for our clients and let them know what the impact is. Because one particular impact may be minimal to shipper A, but dramatic for shipper B. So we help make sure that they understand that. And then there's a number of mitigation strategies, but it's really important for shippers to engage some of those, because if you don't, most of the market just accepts it, right? They just accept the increases. They don't even understand it, so they certainly can't mitigate it or pass it along. It's really critical for shippers to be able to understand, quantify, and then come up with a mitigation strategy.
Understood. And then Thomas, how does Amazon play into all this?
Yeah, so Amazon has really become obviously the big player. I would say that they're still moving at a slower pace than we had anticipated, where they started beta testing markets probably 3 or 4 years ago in terms of becoming a direct competitor. But they built out their network, not quite to the level to be competitive with UPS and FedEx at this point, but we certainly anticipate that they'll be there within the next few years. They are strategically pursuing certain shippers based on where they are geographically, based on volume and so forth, but they still rely to a certain extent on an LTL component to handle the first segment of that. Obviously, their structure is well established for the final mile and really everywhere in between. One thing that we find from shippers is their concern about allowing Amazon in to become their carrier, right? Because now you're giving them visibility to your customer base, to what you do, what you're moving. And Amazon has a history, obviously, where they have the opportunity to replicate maybe something that you're selling and so forth. So I think that's maybe one of the major hurdles, but we certainly expect Amazon to continue to grow at the close to 10% pace and become a viable, really third option in the market.
Okay. So you do see that continuing?
Absolutely.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
But, and to your point now, how does that work for smaller shippers? Are they afraid to do that, or is it the large ones that are afraid? You know, like Walmart wouldn't use their network.
Walmart's starting to even
that's true,
as well, which is pretty amazing. Yeah, so you have to find the fine line and so forth. Personally, I'm not, I think they've said that there's some firewalls and so forth that limits the information they receive, but I think that's hard to imagine. I think it's just something that's going to be on people's minds as they get into these relationships and so forth. But the entire industry is changing so much, in terms of even as you mentioned early on, the final mile and the different resources available and so forth. So cost is a big part of it, and Amazon certainly will not just be here to stay, but they're going to become really the biggest in the space.
What about, are there any capacity constraints at the moment? Like, because maybe Amazon's become that third shipper, is there less or more capacity at the moment, or where are you seeing any issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously that was a major concern a few years ago, but there really isn't any significant capacity constraints now. There may be some local capacity issues just because the carriers have been closing underperforming or older facilities, but as a whole, there's actually excess capacity from all the carriers, so there shouldn't be any capacity issues with in general. Now there might be, again, a particular lane where there's a little bit, or the geographic footprint of the building that was closed, but in general, there's plenty of capacity for this year's peak.
Okay. And maybe with regard to last mile, going a little off script here, but how will that impact the shippers, the parcel shippers? Like, will there be more gig shipping? Will there, or if there is excess capacity now, maybe UPS and FedEx have more availability to do same day shipping?
I think it's where we're seeing really the biggest shift, right? So I remember some years ago when we used to have these conversations, really, which retailers are best positioned for certain things. Now it's really what type of solution is almost any retailer with a national presence required to have in order to properly fulfill, which involves, one, yes, you have to have the ability to ship from a DC or one of your DCs based on a UPS or FedEx solution or something like that. And then it gets down to, at the local level, the expectation may be, hey, look, I want to be able to pick that up this afternoon. So is it going to be a gig driver that makes that delivery? Is it a still the curbside, right, where you have your specific parking spots available and that product will be brought out to you? You still want to drive foot traffic into the store. So what can you encourage now to still have people, come into your store and so forth, So when you look back years ago, Walmart used to have their pickup in the back of the store, and that was, one of the benefits is now you have to walk through everything, and maybe you'll pick up 10 things along the way. And along the way, through their market research, they found, look, we need to make this more accessible to people, so they moved it to the front. So I would say now you need to have, and most do, now from a retail perspective where you have a national presence, you want to have the local courier gig driver availability, you want to have the pickup in store, you want to have various options, and then you want, not just in terms of offering specific time in transit days, you want to have the tracking, you want to be able to allow people to know, look, here's where, even if it's, depending on what the item is, hey, this will be there in the next hour or so, and people expect to receive it, so all those things have become very important.
That makes sense. And how are you advising shippers with regard to that? Like, can they trust these gig services to have that tracking, or do they have to add new technology or something to make that happen?
There's some that are better than others for sure, but I think there's a lot of really robust, this was built out during the pandemic, I think to a large extent. Sort of started with the food aspect where you could no longer go in and food was being delivered to you, and it's sort of built on that model. It's been around obviously for longer, but that's when we saw it sort of take off. And the tracking to a certain extent is pretty robust, but there are where there's gaps, and it still comes down to that individual driver at times. So it depends what's being shipped, the value of that good, and so forth, and it does vary. But I think we'll see that improve over time.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's a lot of non-transportation considerations there too. So obviously using gig drivers makes your supply chain much more efficient because they can scale easily and you're not paying for empty capacity. But the delivery experience from somebody in his 10-year-old Honda wearing a t-shirt is very different than a uniform UPS and FedEx driver. And depending on the value of the good, depending on the importance of the delivery experience in your marketing and for your product, you may make choices that aren't necessarily wholly financially based. They may be image based as well. So all those voices need to be heard when making that type of decision.
Okay. And Kenneth, staying kind of on that topic, how does automation and robotics play in this? Like, I was just in San Francisco and tried a Waymo, which is your driverless car. And I know that for years we've been hearing about robotic delivery, driverless car delivery, things like that. But how does that help on the capacity side? And what are you seeing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I recently toured for a number of our clients, their distribution facilities, and the level of variance in automation is dramatic. So there are very heavily automated fulfillment centers where they become much more efficient, right? Less space is necessary. In fact, there's one I went through, we actually had to find someone to turn on the lights because it operates completely in the dark because it's all robots and they don't need any light. So we had to figure out someone that could turn the lights on for us so we could tour it. So those that have invested in AI and in robotics are much more efficient than ones that haven't. But of course, there's a heavy capital outlay, so there's a lot of variation there. But those that can, both in robotics and predictive analytics, has really been a big field now that a lot of folks are interested in. There's so much data available now, and you can do so much with it. For example, we're working with a couple clients on weather prediction. So we look at historical weather patterns to determine, all right, based on clients in these geographies, there's a 18% chance there's gonna be a snowstorm in Minneapolis on this date. We might need to pre-stage inventory to avoid that type of disruption. And whereas before it might have been a feeling, right? Or you just talk to the guy that's lived here for 64 years. Now, data-based, you can actually get down to specific weeks and try to make accommodations for that. So those that can leverage it well, it really can make your supply chain more efficient and more predictive.
is that on the shipper or the the carrier to have to invest in that type of thing?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Both, and a collaboration. So for example, if a shipper identifies, we typically have weather delays in this area, they may work with the carrier to try to get their product there faster, or even an upgrade in service mid-transit, right? So it may be moving across the country and it hasn't reached the problem area yet, but in order to avoid the problem that's coming, if we can accelerate the delivery, we may get it there beforehand. So it's really a collaboration between the two.
And Thomas, back to Amazon for a second. Like, does Amazon have an edge in this area where they'll be able to, because their network or their technology, that they can actually?
I don't know that they have an edge, because, to Kenneth's point, sometimes it's beyond even the shipper, right? So once, there's maybe, let's stick with the weather problem. Once that's been identified, for FedEx to now avoid Memphis, for example, proactively based on anticipated changes and so forth, we're seeing a lot of that, at least communication from the carriers about that. Now, whether Amazon has a benefit versus the other type, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Okay, gotcha. What maybe shifting gears to the retail side of all this. I've asked you guys this every time we talk. What's the average cost of a shipment to get a box to someone's house, to all of our houses?
So that varies significantly, right? So if we go back to sort of the local aspect of things, where again, you're shipping from a store, it could be certainly in that mid single digits. As soon as you start dealing with the UPS or FedEx, you can probably anticipate that it's double digits and going up. So low, $10 range plus for a ground shipment. Typically, we tell our clients, once you start adding a time and transfer requirements, such as moving from ground to a 2-day guarantee, you can probably expect to double that price. Once you move to express, you're probably tripling or quadrupling from that ground price. So 10 can become 20, can become 30, but it varies significantly. So UPS and FedEx both have a one-rate program, which could be an all-in, and you can get down to a 2-day product in $10 to $12 range. But again, the benefit of, again, having a distribution at a local level, now you get into maybe half that price. Time in transit is no longer 2, 3, 4 days. It could be a matter of 2 or 3 hours. Better customer experience. Yes, you have less reliable delivery, but I think it's a delivery level that people have become accustomed to over the last 5 years, where, hey, there's this odd person at my front doorstep with the package, and it's like, okay, well, they're just delivering, it's just another guy that's delivering something, right? So, it's not the guy running up in the brown uniform or, FedEx or what have you. So it's a little bit different experience, but the cost can vary, significantly, obviously. And then once you get into the additional handling, oversized type things, that can have a massive increase on costs, especially in the last few years. That's where we've seen the greatest rate increases. Demand fees having a significant impact, even tying back to sort of what you talked about earlier in terms of fees. The demand fee, you'll see even Carol Tome says, look, we had to announce the demand fee late because we still don't really know what the costs are. No, that was a play for UPS to be able to announce it late so that they don't have to negotiate it to be reduced, so they can see the financial benefit. And they'll say, look, this is to account for additional costs. Yes, but there's also substantial additional revenue. Your delivery density improves significantly. I think certainly from our pricing days in the carrier world, yes, the costs go up, but so does the revenue. And these are opportunities for all the carriers to make money, right? So this has been, Amazon now charges demand fees, the regional carriers charge demand fees or peak fees. So there are revenue opportunities to help improve margins.
Understood. Okay. So, taking it one step further, then, how does a small retailer compete with pricing? I get it. Walmart, can negotiate a much better rate, and so the cost of that box comes down quite a bit. But if you're a small retailer, what do you do? How do you?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? One of the advantages, so the small, medium-sized businesses, they don't have the scale of of large shippers to get better rates. But they tend to be more nimble. So they tend to be more able to implement some of these alternative solutions, like peak drivers or bringing in a regional carrier, or one of these other solutions that doesn't require 9 levels of IT management to go make a change, right? So they can offset sometimes their lack of scale with nimbleness and efficiency and speed in making changes. And they tend to be less risk averse. They're more willing to take some chances. So sometimes if they get creative, there's some solutions there. But also just through carrier negotiations, a lot of SMBs don't think they can negotiate better rates, and normally they can. Now, they're not going to reach Walmart levels, but they can improve where we are. We see it on a daily basis. We have 2 shippers in the same industry that ship the same product to the same places, and one's paying 20-25% more than the other. So trying to at least even the playing field with your peers would be a top priority.
I would add that the B2B shippers, it seems like those consumers are much less price price sensitive than when you deal with e-commerce. So a lot of those that are in that space, you're passing through a certain level of that cost, or even marking up to a certain extent. So I think part of that is that you do have the B2B recipient that's willing to pay those costs a little bit more often. It tends to be more of a specialized product, where maybe something you're not necessarily picking up at a local store and so forth. So there are some reasons why people are buying that, and they're willing to pay a little bit for shipping. I think the concept of free shipping, yes, it's certainly around and still here to stay, but you see more and more that we've moved away from that. Same as the 2-day model, right? Where yes, there's still there are people that are seeking it, but they're not always expecting it. So I think that plays into it.
And we found with the assistance we've given on online platforms, e-commerce platforms, more important thing than either free shipping or like 2-day shipping is choice today. So you can have free shipping, but the trade-off is you're going to wait this amount of time. Or you can have it in 2 days, which you're going to have to pay for. So giving the consumer that choice is really beneficial, even if they don't take the choice. Just the fact that they have the choice, it lets those that are price conscious go in one direction, those that are time conscious go in another direction. So for retailers to offer that choice is really, really critical today.
And is that something that you guys help retailers with?
We do.
Yeah. Like, what's the right price?
Yes.
Make that choice.
Exactly. And we help them with a lot of what we'll do is A/B testing too, where they'll set up 2 versions of their website, and there's a random diversion for clients. So for example, they may have one instance of the website where there's free shipping over a certain amount, and another one where there's free shipping over a different amount. And we see how it drives sales and what the cart abandonment is. And then from that, they're not using industry average information, they're using their customer base data to determine what that right level is.
And Thomas, how do you see this shaping up for 2026 as you kind of head into the next year? Like, what strategies are you guys kind of anticipating? I guess you have to guess what the carriers are going to do for next year. So
Yeah.
what are you thinking?
I think the number one, from a carrier perspective, UPS, FedEx, I think we'll continue to see them leveling off, maybe even have a little bit of downturn. The expectation is UPS and Amazon pulling back on their relationship a little bit, but with FedEx stepping in and handling maybe some of Amazon's heavier packages. So maybe a little bit of growth from the FedEx side, a little bit of drop from the UPS end, unless they can re-engage with the post office and have a service for their lightweight residential volume. Right now, they're just not able to be priced competitively. I think we'll continue to see the post office have a bigger role, especially with the ground advantage. It seems to be a real good, viable option for, and not even just for the very lightweight, but in the sort of mid-level there. Amazon will continue to grow as well. We'll continue to see the emergence of the smaller players, the regionals. We see a lot of these sort of in-betweens that are targeting very specific markets and sort of marketing from perspective of, we have 30 different facilities that can service 70% of the US population, right? So finding ways to move volume into those back to the final mile and being very strategic about what they're doing. And a lot of this just keeps tying back to technology as well. You know, how can people then have access to all these various solutions and utilize those? I think those things will all come into play.
Yeah, one of the things I'm watching really closely is we talked about how they use their rate increases and surcharges to change behavior. So we already mentioned the 38 rate increases this year. I really think the market's headed towards some level of dynamic pricing, almost like airline tickets, where right now, you know, it used to be you had one price for the year. And then it changed to you have one price for 2 sections of the year. Now, every couple of weeks there's a different price. We might start see, you know, there's demand surcharges for the holiday season now. We might see increases for Mother's Day, for Valentine's Day. It wouldn't even surprise me to see at some point, you know, for example, the carrier's busiest day is always Monday. They might start charging more to pick up your packages on Monday than they do on Thursday. And that does 2 things for them. It drives more revenue, or it gets them to flatten out that bell curve of packages that come in. So I think we're gonna see more and more of that, which of course, it's gonna be more and more difficult for shippers to keep track of, well, if I ship this on Monday, which gets to my customer the time I want it to, but I'm gonna pay 15% more. If I wait till Thursday, is that a better option? So whoever's most educated and much up to date on that is gonna be the ones that really win in that environment. But I think that's a trend to watch, is a move toward that dynamic pricing.
That I think is a good segue to the next question, which you've talked about this before too, predictive analytics, basically leveraging technology, generative AI. Can you talk more about that and how that's going to change the way people think about shipping?
Sure, absolutely. So there'll be both a carrier perspective in that and a shipper perspective. So from the carrier perspective, they'll understand when they have excess capacity, when they have constrained capacity. So I would see them using the incentive of lower rate for when they have excess capacity, and the disincentive of higher rates when they have constrained capacity. And so I think just no different than what Delta would do, right? If their plane's 98% full, you're gonna pay more for that last seat, but if it's 40% full, then you're gonna pay for the next seat. From shippers, one of the things we've seen a real increase in is more granular data on inventory staging. So for example, Thomas and I were talking earlier about how, for example, in a fulfillment center, they would put up front and center the products that are sold most often, right? 80% most high moving products. But it tended to be static. Well, now we're seeing, well, the most 80% highest churn products for this month, for this quarter, for this season. So it's being much more reactive, and they're using the data to drive that. Well, what needs to be closer to the pickers now, not when we take a look at the entire year, especially for, say, clothing companies, where what they sell in January is very different than what they're selling in July. And having that change their operation and even manning hours, right? So what staff level do we need during this month versus that month? And it used to be very reactionary, right? Oh my gosh, we're overwhelmed, let's bring in more people. Now it's, we're gonna be overwhelmed, let's bring in more people. So that predictive analytics is really filtering through everywhere, and whoever leverages that the best is gonna come out ahead.
Yeah. I think we have a couple minutes left. Thomas, what are you thinking for the holidays? What's the outlook? Will it be a good holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, if you look what the industry experts say, they say about 3%, I think, overall in terms of growth, and then maybe 7 to 9% or so online in terms of online sales. So I'll rely on the experts when it comes to that information. And I think that's probably reasonable, right? But it's you know, the people that have the financial capability of doing so are, you know, continuing to buy, and maybe some more premium type products, and then you have the more cost conscious that are pulling back and being pretty conservative about what they're purchasing.
That's great. Maybe one last, anything I should have asked you guys, or?
No, I think one of the things I think I've found, you know, we get asked the question about tariffs all the time and how that's changed things. And really, I think more than tariffs, the removal of the de minimis exemption has really changed some very specific supply chains dramatically. So versus the tariffs, which may have changed them overall a little bit, the de minimis exemption removal has really changed a lot of those direct importers have now had to become ocean shippers and then break bulk once they hit the US and then do their distribution here. So for the swath of retailers that fell into that category, it's been a dramatic shift, and it'll be interesting to see how they play out long term with that whole shift in their business model.
That's great. Thank you. I think we'll have to leave it there. So thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.